Joff Owens, the lead character in the East End Beckons, is a poor boy from a Cornish smuggling family who is forced to flee home, and this is where I will pick up the story. He would go to Polperro and hoped that from there he would head out to sea. After a breakfast of more shellfish beneath a deep grey sky, he began walking. He walked until darkness fell, until the rain that had been threatening all day began, making everything slippery underfoot. Typical Cornwall, always plenty of hills and valleys, and whenever it rained, the footing was treacherous, especially at night in unfamiliar territory. Somehow he reached the top of yet another hill, where he paused for breath. With the rain on his face, despondency in his heart, and the wind in his hair, he could see through the trees the lights of Polperro twinkling in the distance below. His hope was renewed. Although he knew the village, he had never arrived by land before. He headed downwards slowly and with great caution. Polperro was built either side of a natural stream that flowed to the horseshoe-shaped harbour below. Here, the stream ran out first onto the beach and then into the sea. The hills either side of it were dotted with cottages, barns, haphazard homes, and a large wooden pilchard cannery right on the dock. The buildings on the right faced those on the left, and vice versa. Everything overlooked the harbour and the beach. This was a place intentionally hard to arrive in unnoticed. If Joff could, he planned to creep through the trees. Approaching via the only single-track road was folly. He would be spotted before he was halfway down the hill, and he had to be careful. Vagrancy was a crime and carried harsh consequences. Joff set off once more, stumbling in the darkness over the uneven ground, with a cold, persistent wind blowing relentlessly into his face. He was travelling blind, but he could taste salt in the air, and it gave him the strength to carry on. He kept walking unsteadily downwards, ever lower, with the rain in his face, and feeling as though the Atlantic was calling him. The nearer to the coast he got, the gustier the wind became, its direction less easy to be sure of. He stopped and scanned the darkness, and then he saw the ocean. It had never looked so beautiful. Moonlight was reflecting off its angry surface. Whitecaps danced across the vast writhing mass, and the smell of it filled his nostrils. Joff leaned gratefully against the end tree of a row of cedars, whilst below him the lights of Polperro danced, invitingly closer. He collected his breath, and ignoring his heavy heart, began the final ascent. He was in a desperate situation and in dire need of some luck. This could very well be his last shot. He had friends here, but it had been a while since he'd passed this way, and when they were needed, friends could prove to be extremely fickle. Distracted by his thoughts, he tripped on a tree root. He fell and cursed under his breath, and somewhere below a dog barked deeply. The sound echoed around the natural amphitheatre, no doubt putting all on high alert. He waited, crouching low, while the dog settled. Trees and akuba shrubs grew all the way to the houses, and when silence returned, he used them as cover, making his way ever closer to other people. Joff reconnected with the stream that ran through the centre of town. Then, using its right bank, he guided himself through the dwellings. Ahead he could see lights and knew there was a coaching house. He slowed down, taking care not to pass too near, realising that he looked suspicious and not wanting any encounters here, where the revenue men were likely to have their spies stationed. No, he needed one of the smaller drinking dens nearer the beach, somewhere that catered to the locals, the fishermen, somewhere the lights were not too bright, where he would stand a chance of reacquainting himself with a friendly face. Joff needed somewhere right on the harbour that offered a clear view of anyone who might be approaching. In short, he needed the Blue Peter, or the Blue as the locals called it. It was a busy night in the pub. The door kept swinging back and forth as he moved cautiously closer, until, crouching behind an overgrown hawthorn, he could make out people's features. He watched figures in dark clothing scuttling in and out, each and every one of them caught by the lamplight as they passed. Every time the door opened, his senses were assaulted by the light, the chat, the warmth, and especially the aroma of hot food being released into the night. It was hard to stay focused, but finally he saw a man he knew, exactly the type of man he'd been hoping to spot. "Duggan!" he hissed, and the solitary figure about to push open the door halted in his tracks and turned, looking over his shoulder, trying to identify who was calling his name. As he turned, his face fell instantly into shadow. Joff dismissed the thought that he could be mistaken. "Duggan!" he hissed again. It was Duggan Libby, a man he had worked shoulder to shoulder with not more than a year ago. He had been part of things the day they'd unloaded 180 barrels of French brandy right into Polperro harbour in broad daylight. Duggan had been responsible for the landing crew, for delivering the haul to a more secure location away from the coast. They'd spent 4 days in each other's company, and Duggan had said if Joff was ever back in town, he should look him up. Well, now he was back in town. It was time. "Over here, Duggan!" he hissed again, hoping not to attract any other unwanted attention. "Who's there?" Duggan called, rather more loudly than the occasion demanded. Joff was reluctant to reveal himself by name, especially in a place where you feel you're always being watched. He stood up a little so he could be seen more clearly and called in an even tone, "Over here." Duggan saw him, and a shadow of recognition flitted across his face, present for the briefest of moments, and then it was gone. Joff had seen it. It meant news had spread. He'd heard already. The awful crimes Joff was accused of, whatever they might be, were no longer confined to the town he'd left in such a hurry. Duggan looked as though he was considering turning back to the pub, but Joff was upright now, and he started moving towards his friend, who, to his credit, waited for him to approach. "Joff Owens, as I live and breathe. It's been a while, eh?" he observed, sticking out his hand to shake. He resisted any temptation to glance about when they shook, and Joff silently thanked him for that. At least the man wasn't ashamed to be seen with him, he realised. "So, what brings you to our neck of the woods?" he asked. Joff studied him. He seemed calm, relatively pleased to see his friend now. Perhaps Joff had been wrong, and his name was not yet mud in these parts. "They're all looking for you, you know," Duggan announced. He was smiling as he delivered the information. So it was out. At least he knew for sure, he supposed. "Been a naughty boy, have we?" Duggan was grinning now. Despite the gravity of the situation, despite the horrific pangs of hunger tormenting him, despite everything, Joff couldn't help smiling along. He shook his head slowly from side to side, and looking Duggan right in the eye, he said, "No, I haven't been anything like as naughty as they say." They grinned at each other. "What are they saying?" he added. Duggan tutted, and after glancing about, checking for witnesses to their little reunion, he turned back to face Joff and, still grinning, asked outright, "So you weren't up on the cliff?" He paused for dramatic effect. "Smuggling?"